Kia ora koutou, ka mi nui ki koutou, kia ora, welcome to this meeting of the Dunedin City Council for Friday the 3rd of September, slightly later than had been anticipated. Welcome to council colleagues and to staff both on this call and following along in their home-based offices. Yeah, slightly later than originally scheduled due to the fact that we needed our staff to focus on maintaining our essential services through Alert Level 4. And I do want to open the meeting by acknowledging the work of the staff within the organisation. It's a remarkable thing to keep a machine like this going in the constraints that we currently face, particularly to our essential workers who are still turned up every day and borne greater than their fair share of the risk in order to make sure that people can drink the water from their taps and flush their toilets, etc. So thank you to them. I do want to also acknowledge a couple of people who have passed during the lockdown period. Sir Michael Cullen, of course, whose contribution on the national stage has been well documented since then, but also, of course, spent the best part of 20 years as an advocate for our residents in the south of the city, and also wanted to acknowledge the passing of Marilyn Webb, the artist and teacher and long-term contributor to the work of our grants subcommittee, and both of them leave significant legacies and will be missed. We have no people appearing before the public forum, nor do we have any apologies, so they need not be dealt with. I'll move the council confirm the agenda without addition or alteration. Seconded, Councillor Gary, thank you. Any discussion? I'll put it, all those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. Declarations of interest. Any amendments to be made to the interest register at this point? In which case I'll move that council note the elected members' interest register confirms the proposed management plan and notes the proposed management plan for the executive leadership team. Seconded, Councillor Gary, thank you. All those in favour, raise your hands. Those against? That's agreed. Part A report, item 5, the submission to the Otago Regional Council Regional Policy Statement 2021, noting that Councillor Hall is sitting back from this item. Dr. Johnson should be joining us to speak to this. Just connecting now. And Mr. Freeland and Mr. Drew and a cast of thousands available to answer questions that she can't. Anything by way of introduction from you, Dr. Johnson?
Paul's the main author of this report and can make some introductory statements.
That'll be helpful, thank you. Mr. Freeland.
Sorry, technically challenged.
It's quite all right. Welcome.
Thank you. So yeah, I'd just like to make a few opening statements with regards to the submission on the regional policy statement. The first is really that this is a sort of an unfortunate situation. It's not this new RPS is not the making of, or the intention of, the regional council has been imposed upon them by an Environment Court judge. And it's unfortunate in that the current regional policy statement is almost fully operative, and so we've been through submissions and hearings and appeals, and we've almost resolved everything, and then we've reopened the whole regional policy statement, and primarily because of freshwater management. And so that in itself is unfortunate, and it's also at a time when things are particularly busy. There are unresolved appeals by us on the regional council's regional plan waste and regional plan water, which are still before the Environment Court. the regional council has appeals and submissions against the second generation plan. And of course, we're in a massive amount of change or potential change through the resource management reforms. And so there are new national policy statements about to be released on Indigenous biodiversity and highly productive land. We've recently had the national policy statement for urban development, and so there's a lot of things going on. So I just want to make that point. The other thing is that the regional policy statements are, from a planner's perspective and a land use planning perspective, the most important policy for the city. We have to have regard for the proposed regional policy statement, and we have to give effect to an operative regional policy statement. So it's imperative that that we get it right. And unfortunately, because of resourcing and because of timing and because of the myriad of things going on, we haven't had as much consultation with the regional council in developing this regional policy statement. And normally that consultation would also be with the other territorial local authorities for the region and local iwi. And certainly previously we've had good consultation, and we've managed to iron out a lot of things ahead of notification. In this instance, not so much. But in my opinion, this submission, and it's a long submission, will enable those conversations to take place, albeit after notification. But also I'd like to acknowledge that while my name is on the report, and you might have a number of questions for me, this is a hugely collaborative effort. Massive input from our Three Waters team, Parks and Recreation, Waste, the General Manager for Maori Partnerships and Policy, and a number of staff within the City Development team. So huge effort, big job. I'll do my best to answer the questions that you might have, but I was hugely reliant on other people. So those are my main opening statements.
Thanks, Paul. Questions, councillors, if people can raise their hand per the functionality of the platform, that would make it easier to manage. There appear to be none. Councillor O'Malley.
I'm working off my laptop, so I couldn't find my raise hand.
Okay, here we go. Welcome.
Page 30 of our report, page 4 of your report, you refer to the King Salmon case quite well. And could you comment a little bit on the use of the word avoid in terms of the Supreme Court's interpretation of that, and how this influences our submission to the ORC?
Yeah, so happy to do that. The King Salmon decision is a very important decision. It effectively determined that the use of the word avoid acted as a prohibition, and so if it's unfettered or it's not given qualified, it could mean that you can't do anything in those circumstances. So typically we have a couple of prohibited activities in the district plan, but typically we would say there'll be a qualifier like unless, or unless the effects are mitigated as far as practicable, or some outs for certain types of activities, for instance a road in a hazard area, or essential housing development in an area where there's productive land.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and thanks, Paul and team, undertaking this gargantuan task. A great effort. I guess it's a two-part question. You alluded to the fact that there was a less than ideal consultation process took place with a bunch of others that normally would be part of that. So what are the consequences of that? And are they, the second part of the question, I guess, is that slightly tempered by the fact that I think, as you've alluded to in the paper, the RMA requires that this is a two-part submission process. So will we, in essence, have another chance further down the line to maybe address some of those potential problems?
Yes, so two parts of that question. The result of, shall we say, less than comprehensive pre-consultation, this moves it into a more potentially formal environment. And so the regional council will be able to mediate with parties who make submissions either on a formal or informal basis. So they can either seek, so that they can meet with parties prior to making decisions or having hearings. So that's all that does. And so it puts it into the public sort of environment that we're stating the places where we think there should be improvements. In terms of the further submission process, you're correct. What we get to do then is see what submissions are made by other parties, and we can either support or oppose those submission points. So in this instance, there may be other local authorities or other parties who have good or bad ideas that we either want to support or oppose, and we'd have an opportunity to do that at a later stage.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elder.
Thank you. You were talking about the Parks and Recreation having an input into this, and one of the big things is our wetlands, our rivers, etc., are wonderful places to increase biodiversity, but also enable access for well-being and mental health and recreation. And I was just wondering if you could make a commentary on that and, you know, enabling access.
So that is an important thing in terms of mental health, and access to rivers and waterways, etc., are provided for through the Resource Management Act. It's not necessarily a regional matter. We provide for it through the district plan at present, and if we wanted to increase those access ways or provisions, then we could do that through a change to our own district plan. I'm unsure whether the proposed MPS on Indigenous biodiversity will address that or not, but that's due to come out later this year. And if it does, that will have a direct impact upon both our district plan and the regional plans.
All right, if I just add to Paul's answer to that, there is content within the RPS that does promote those things. And so certainly they seem to have picked up on that theme and do encourage the creation of Esplanade reserves. But as Paul highlights, that's a requirement under the Act anyways. So yeah, so they do have that in their proposed RPS.
Oh, thank you for that feedback, because that was one of my concerns, because one it enables people
Any
to
further
access.
questions, Councillor?
Yeah, no, that
Councillor Barker.
answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first is 96 pages of submission, and do you feel confident that it covers everything? Because I know that it's a two-part process. I know that it's a two-part process, but you also kind of need to cover yourself with that. Is there anything else that you might find later? Do you feel confident that that nothing's arisen since this was written?
I feel confident that nothing has arisen which needs a change at this point in time, and I would just also advise that we took legal advice in terms of preparing the submission, and there are some components of the submission which gives us a wide scope and wide breadth for being involved in all matters to do with the RPS, and that's a deliberate approach.
Right. My other question. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to, apologies. I just wanted to jump in. Even under the NPSCFM process that's being followed here, we will still have the opportunity to to submit further submissions on issues that are raised by others through through this process. Yeah,
that's right, and some of those other processes are still yet to take place as well. So the regional councils, the freshwater management consultation is due to happen soon, and they also foreshadow a regional plan, land and water, which isn't in existence yet, and so that will have to go through a public process as well.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Barker.
My next question was actually around the regional plan, land and water. It says here that considering the policy framework of this RPS without having consulted on the content of the regional plan, land and water. Do you know what the timeline for that is? So is that going to be going alongside this?
My understanding is that the regional plan, land and water will be next year. I'm unsure whether there'll be some overlap between the two, but as I say, it would have been better. We had commenced some initial consultation with the regional council some time ago on the regional plan, land and water, but events have overtaken themselves.
I know it's a very difficult environment. My other question is just because I did look through the other councils in this area, and I saw the Central Otago District Council's submission, which was quite short and seemed to agree with a lot of what was put in it. And I couldn't see a Clutha District Council submission in any of their meetings. So I'm just wondering if you've talked to any of the other councils that sit under the Otago Regional Council about their submissions and whether they reflect what ours says.
I haven't personally. Anna's involved with the managers of the other planning departments of the other councils. You have to recall, you have to realise that we're obviously the largest in terms of our population and our resourcing, and we often take a lead in terms of regional matters, and some of the smaller councils or less well resourced councils not so much. Yeah. But Anna might have talked to some others, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we have had, not with CODC, but I have had some informal conversation with some planners from QLDC who they would more likely have a similar perspective to us as a high growth city in terms of some of the key issues that we've raised. However, nothing formal in terms of sharing content. The time frame, it's a really busy time, and a lot of people were also scrambling around the submission on the RM reform. So I think everyone was sort of in consultation overload mode, when this RPS submission was required to be done. But I do know that QLDC has some similar issues. But I guess the other thing I would highlight why we would be different to the CODC is not just the growth context, because of course they are experiencing some growth issues themselves, but it's really where we are with our 2GP. So with the 2GP and trying to reconcile it with the current RPS, we have had immediate experience of how an RPS can come into a dialogue and an appeal process around the district plan. So we, I guess, have a heightened sense of what, how we need it to work to support our own planning process, which CODC, who have not progressed their 2GP very far, probably don't have that same perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Benson-Pope.
Just happy to move when you've dispensed with questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, that is helpful. Councillor Raddick.
Thank you. Firstly, my compliments for the phenomenal amount of work that's gone into this. First question is 105, to do with vehicles. We've got, I'm wondering about the, I suppose, the description and the narrowness of the description of the types of individual vehicles, because obviously there's a general policy theme to reduce reliance on private motor vehicles and move towards active in public transport. But also, within a couple of paragraphs that you're commenting on, you're focusing solely on electric vehicles, but in another part, you're focusing on allowing the possibility for ultra low emission vehicles. And I was wondering, would it be more practical to leave that door open for ultra low emission vehicles and other alternatives, because we don't know what the future of vehicles may yet bring, because there may yet be non-emission vehicles that are not electric. And I think to narrow it down to electric, when we've got till 2029 to be working on this, it's quite a wee way out. And the door is like the range of possibilities are quite circumscribed, and specifically named as a specific type of vehicle. And I don't believe anyone here can predict the future 10 years out as far as vehicles go. But I do believe that
Would you like to pause to allow your question to be answered?
Okay. Well, a little bit of background might have been helpful, but
Well, we can get to that in debate, should it be required.
yes, but it doesn't help with the question.
Now,
Anyway,
Mr. Freeland.
Mr. Freeland.
I think that's a very good point. We try wherever possible to future-proof the provisions, and Councillor Radich makes a good point about our inability to foresee the future completely. And if we've made it too narrow and it needs some expansion to consider those other things, and I'll have a look at that and see if we can amend it slightly. But it may well, I haven't got it right in front of me, unfortunately, because I'm technically challenged.
Thank you.
It may give us enough scope to actually have that conversation and raise that point through the process anyhow.
Yes, it's just allowing the future possibilities. Now, a bit further along.
And of course, anything, I mean, we can, when it gets to the further submission stage, we can refine or expand upon any other submissions that have been made. And there is as opposed to trying to rewrite our submission this afternoon necessarily.
Well, we can't expand the scope through a further submission, so we would need someone to submit on it quickly enough to enable that change. And just on making minor editorial changes, I do note the submission is supposed to be lodged by 3 p.m. this afternoon, and while some parties have asked for an extension, the Regional Council haven't provided for one, although they say they will be open to late submissions, and we can seek a waiver of meeting the time requirement, but it'd be preferable not to do that.
Yeah, very accommodating. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Freeland. So I have a couple more questions.
Yeah,
Is that right? So similarly, at 115, cross-water contamination between sewerage and stormwater systems. It's quite an important consideration in the Dunedin context, of course, but we do have here a categorical list of the types of cross-contamination examples that we have now, but there may very well be other examples that aren't included on that list. And it's probably in a similar nature of a suggestion, just about to come up with a generic framing of those examples, rather than being so specific and so circumspect, so circumscribed, that so closely detailed that it doesn't allow for other possibilities. Did you have any comment on that?
Could you just clarify exactly which part of the submission you're looking at?
Which submission point, Councillor?
115.
Which submission? So page 115.
Oh, okay. So no,
115.
page 55 in our notes. On the left-hand margin, it's 115.
Thank you.
Whatever that is. I don't know what the header on that is. Probably the RPS page number. And it's page 55 of our notes. So thanks.
So our submission there, Councillor Radich, is requesting clarity on what a cost contamination means. We're not saying put those definitions in, we're just asking for more clarity around what a cross connection is.
Fine. Okay, so in fact, you're way ahead of me. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So moving right along, I do have a question about on page 59, RPS page number 124. Amend to include material about mitigation of sediment processes currently being obstructed by large dams. Did you have anything in mind as to how, sediment processes the sediment that is obstructed by the large dams on the Clutha might be mitigated?
So this is input from our three waters team, and in particular our coastal specialist Tom Simon-Smith. I think, and I don't think he's available for questions at the moment, but he considered this to be, given this is a regional policy statement and this is a regional issue, that it should be encompassed within the regional policy statement. I think primarily he was looking for an acknowledgement that the situation exists, and it should be the black and white for everyone to see without actually necessarily a solution to that issue.
Yeah, so is that so that if some mechanism was devised, it could be employed? Is that what Mr. Drew?
I think it's just to acknowledge that this is an issue, and that if as a result of that issue there are problems, that it's known and acknowledged that is the reason why, or a contributing factor for those issues. If there is a solution, then I guess that could go on the regional policy statement or one of the regional plans, but it's really just an acknowledgement at this point.
Right, thank you. And lastly, on page 113 of our notes and RPS line, or RPS page 188.
Oh, Councillor, they're not pages, they're submission points, but the left-hand column, you mean?
I mean the left-hand column, page 188. And
they are page numbers.
And,
are they? Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah, that's right. That's what it said on the header. So similarly, intensification of housing, it's a reasonably tight definition of the desired areas for intensification of housing as listed there, A and B. And similarly, to me, there may very well be other possibilities of intensified housing that aren't included on that list. And I don't know what they are as I sit here, but to me, it would be ideal to allow the possibility for some developer's imagination to produce some desirable, intensified development in some other place other than A and B.
I can take that one, Paul. So our submission there is to not have any individual matters listed, so that the first option that we present to them, the A and B in the second option are the existing content. So I guess we could change that to more strongly word that our preference is that it's left more open rather than narrow. But at the moment that we've set out that we think it should be more broadly worded. And I would agree with you that there are certainly other opportunities for intensification other than the ones that they have listed.
Right. Okay, well, I'll just leave that with you. I was just trying to make useful comments for the submission or questions. And that concludes my questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I mean, it's probably worth reiterating. I'm assuming that all of these submission points are consistent with council's own strategic directions as set out in the district plan, operative
Yeah,
or agreed second generation district plan.
yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I just have a question, just following on from Councillor Raddick's question about future proofing, and I can't remember, although I remember having the argument through the 2GP process, whether we have a set approach to specifying external documents within policy wording, given that those things are subject to change. There's a number of these are asking for reference to be made to other documents within this planning framework. Do we have a consistent approach to that?
Yeah, so in terms of planning law, you can't future-proof the plan in a way that refers to documents that are to change at the moment in time, and if they change substantially, obviously you'd have to change your plan to refer to it. I think the important thing here is that when they quote, say, a New Zealand coastal policy statement, objective or policy, and they don't reference it, you lose the context and you don't go off to that other policy, national policy document and see how that policy has evolved, come to be and what the basis for it is. And so that's why it's useful. Yes, they can change over time, but as I say, you'd have to update your plan for that.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Menivus.
Hello. Mr. Freeland, the avoid word issue, glad that you've picked it up and highlighted it as you have. It reminds me very much of a similar problem with the word paramount that previous government legislation had, and which was able to be interpreted as taking precedence over absolutely everything else, had to be withdrawn. There was a whole lot of trouble around it. The word avoid in this particular situation, could it simply be substituted with minimize adverse effects? Could you take the word avoid out and simply substitute minimize adverse effects? Do you think that would solve the issue?
It's from one extreme to the other, I think.
It will in some instances. We sometimes use the words as you minimise as far as practicable, and other times we will actually identify activities that we think may be all right under certain circumstances in areas where they've said avoid. And so, but something like a qualifier of to some extent, unless they really do mean to prohibit something outright, they can think of all circumstances, and there's no circumstance where they want to have something happen. They want everything to be avoided. But something along those lines could work in some instances.
So have you identified the cases where they do use avoid that you agree could be under all circumstances?
We haven't identified any like that. Primarily, we think that there will be circumstances where things are managed appropriately and designed appropriately, where you'll be able to have an instance of a utility or the like in most places.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just add.
So you're saying basically that it would be very rare for absolute avoid to be the case.
It would be, yeah, quite rare. It would have to be something which was the health of people primarily, where we might have an avoid policy.
The case law effectively avoid means prohibition.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Dr. Johnson.
I was just going to add to say in as you compared it to, have I disappeared?
Yeah, we're losing you.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So when we reviewed the RPS, we compared it to the content of the 2GP, and really what we're looking at is that it aligns. Have you lost me?
Yes.
That's all right. Go ahead.
All right.
I think what Anna was saying was that when we looked at the RPS, we compared it to our drafting style for the 2GP, and in a lot of instances, we qualified voids. We still use void in the 2GP, but most of them are qualified. There are some exceptions.
Thank
Councillor
you.
O'Malley.
Thank you, Worship. Now for something completely different. I'm going back to page 29 of our report, page 3 of the submission, commentary about the time frame. And you say the time frame, however, has meant that the consultation and preparing the RPS has been inadequate, and this lack of adequate engagement with local authorities is reflected in the quality of the document and the range of matters that the DCC is raising through this submission. And then you do go on to say that this is not a criticism of ORC staff. Who is this addressed to? Is this addressed to the ORC or to central government in terms of the timing? Comment.
So this is addressed to the ORC in terms of timing, but some of the timings, so the timing is imposed upon them by the Environment Court judge, and that they are under quite considerable pressure to get a new RPS in place just as quickly as they can.
So it's a commentary on the timing, but it's not. But it really is an acknowledgement potentially that the timing's not been in anybody's control of anybody's hands. Is that the way you're writing that?
Yeah, I guess so.
But maybe a little bit in the ORC's hands. The reason I'm doing that is because we've had similar commentary around regional land transport plans and other such things, and I'm wondering if it's a consistent commentary or not. Thank you.
This is a little bit different in that it has been directed by the Environment Court judge to get a new RPS in place. And so that's not within the ORC's, they have no ability to change that.
Yeah, so those factors are outside their control. Thank you.
Yeah.
Broadly, on what grounds?
Broadly on the grounds of freshwater management. So freshwater allocation, etc.
So they didn't have the option of just doing the land and water plan without reviewing their entire regional policy statement.
I believe that they could have just done the freshwater aspect of the RPS and left the rest of the plan relatively intact. They could have, like we're doing with the 2GP at the moment, done a variation which just focused on those parts which needed to be changed. I'm unsure as to whether they think it's tidier to do the whole RPS at once. I also note that they've had, quite major changes in personnel all through their organisation, and maybe they want to give a new lens to it. But for whatever reason, it could have been a smaller, tidier process, which wouldn't mean reopening a whole bunch of matters which are largely settled.
Thank you. The recommendations have been moved by Councillor Benson Pope and seconded by Councillor Walker. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor?
I would briefly. Thank you, Your Worship. I think the complexity of the submission and the detail won't be lost on anyone. I'm sure that no one is more familiar with our 2GP and its implications than Dr. Johnson and Mr. Freeland. So I really want to echo the compliments they've already received on the breadth and size of this. I think it's completely comprehensive. We also have and of course aligns, as has been assured several times, aligns with our own planning documents. I think the other bonus that we have is that the process will allow us to fine tune or add or modify a large number of matters should we decide that's necessary as time goes on. So really just a big thank you to staff for not just the planning staff, all the staff involved in such a comprehensive submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Worship. I won't say too much. I just want to comment on Councillor Barker's question about whether we worked with other councils or not during our submission. And I'm sort of foreshadowing, not something here today, but something that's coming with us that the central government is doing around RMA reform and other such things, is they will be looking for cooperation between councils going into the future. So I'm encouraging us to reach out to those smaller councils in environments like this and see if they actually do want to communicate with us as they form their plans and other such things. Not that we are planning on influencing their district plans as it relates to the RPS, but more a way of whether or not we can all work together a little bit. And I just want to comment quickly on the timing of this and the body of work that we've been asked to do. Just want the ORC to be conscious of the fact that when they do this, they do put work onto territorial authorities to achieve the outcomes they need. And I note that they are increasing their rates in order to increase their staffing, and I'm hoping that is to actually help with the outcomes of these sort of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'll try and be brief as well. And again, just echo what I said earlier. Thanks to the staff for working on this. It's certainly not easy stuff, as Councillor Benson-Pope has mentioned. And I guess, as we all know, certainly people like myself who are RMA commissioners, along with some others who have had the agony and the ecstasy of doing the Making Good Decisions program. The RPS obviously is a significant and high level policy statement, which of course our district plan, as everyone knows, has to give effect to. So it's obviously very important, not to mention the fact that it is a fundamental requirement of the IRA. So yeah, so well done, staff. Certainly don't envy your task. And as I guess a couple of others have said, Councillor O'Malley and Councillor Benson-Pope, I certainly support the submission, and particularly the number of concerns we highlight around, I guess, our concerns that the RPS should provide an adequate framework, obviously for us to allow us to deliver what are going to be some large infrastructure that supports the anticipated growth that is happening and will continue to happen in the city, and also that our request at the RPS direction on urban growth doesn't conflict with those in our district plan, which would obviously throw up some significant problems. Also, as we say in our submission, the anticipated growth will inevitably result in some environmental effects. So the regional policy statement needs to put more emphasis on determining, I guess, what level of effects are acceptable to support this growth, and not use, as Councillor Vandevers has mentioned, prescriptive language such as avoid, which may mean that obviously servicing that growth becomes, I guess, well nigh impossible, actually. And I guess we, as Dr. Johnson and Mr. Freeland have mentioned, we already know that there's legislative change in the wind, but via the RMA reform. We're all aware of that, particularly with the establishment of the Natural and Built Environment Act, which I guess looks to better enable development within natural environmental limits, which I think is a better move. So yeah, just in closing again, I want to thank the staff across all council departments who fed into this, and what has been noted was a very short time frame. And as I mentioned earlier, at least the RMA requires a two-stage submission process that at least gives us another chance, if deemed necessary, to make further submissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. For clarity, I assume you meant to mention our obligations under the RMA, not our obligations to the IRA.
Did I actually say IRA?
Yeah, quite. Your heritage betrays you, sir.
Totally
Councillor Vandevers.
Yes, I was very pleased that this submission was very easy to read and well structured. Didn't had no suggestion of nitpicking at all, really went to issues directly. So thank you for that. One of the particular issues which I'm glad was picked up was the issue of historic heritage and the suggestion that all historic heritage had to be preserved, and perhaps even the suggestion somewhere that there might be a two-tier system for pigeonholing historic heritage. I'm very much would like to highlight what has been supported here to amend it to make it clear that every item of historic heritage doesn't necessarily have to be preserved. I'm obviously very keen on preserving historic heritage, but recognise that you can't put historic heritage into one or even two pigeonholes and say we're going to preserve all of that. I think historic heritage buildings or whatever need to be looked at on a basic case-by-case basis. There's a whole spectrum of range of values of different kinds associated with historic heritage. And I'm very glad that the idea that seems to be suggested by the ORC that we just preserve all of it is moderated with looking at what particular value particular historic heritage has. Thank you for highlighting that in this submission.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lord.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Yeah, look, I can support this. I was interested with Mr. Freeland's comments about, as the largest TA, sometimes we are throwing more staff at this and sort of taking a province-wide approach, recognising that some of the smaller TAs just simply don't have the staff or the ability to do this work. And I think when I read some of the things in the submission, I see that approach taken. And one thing that just stood out to me as perhaps a retired farmer, but was the sensible decision that in some cases, it was on page 59 of the report relating to page 25 of the document, that it should make provisions for that in some particular situations, whether it's extreme weather events or failure of plant, there should be some exemptions where discharges to waterways do occur, and not so much that we permit these deliberately, but acknowledge that they happen and should be able to treat them accordingly. So it's things like that make me realise that this is a pretty well thought out document. Well, no, not a well thought out document, but it's a well thought submission and an approach to their document. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reddick.
Yes, thank you very much to the team for the submission. It's a huge amount of work and very impressive and very useful and clear to read. And I would like to just reiterate, I suppose, that my primary points of just a few things of being not so specific and allowing for future possibilities. But also I'd just like to make the point about the, touching on the point that Councillor Lord just made about a bit of cross-contamination or storm and wastewater being discharged direct, or, unfortunate discharges that are in fact necessary. That element is critically important to South Dunedin. It is a very huge safety factor in the flooding risk to South Dunedin, and it's critically important that that becomes included in this regional policy statement. So I don't want to depreciate that in any way whatsoever, because the ability to open lawyer's head is vitally important to our current flood mitigation strategy, and that must be remembered. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to the staff for this great submission. It's certainly large, and my question around whether other TLAs have been asked was when I actually looked through their meetings and saw that they didn't have quite such robust, I guess, submissions as we have, and it's great that we are a leader in this. I also really want to reiterate one of the final points was that the ORC takes the DCC's suggestion of pre-hearing mediation and expert caucusing seriously. There's a huge amount of issues in here, and I wanted to pick up especially on what was it, page 29 of our report, where it says overall the DCC considers that the proposed RPS as currently drafted is quite restrictive and does not adequately provide for all the activities necessary for the well-being of people and communities, including access to housing or the ability to be affordably serviced for infrastructure. I think that a lot of people watching this, I guess, would wonder why we're spending such a long time talking about it and why we're so concerned about it. But this is where our rules start, I guess. And I'd really like to thank the staff for that. I also feel comfort that there is room to manoeuvre as well. That's why I asked the question about have we covered ourselves off enough in the submission to have that room to manoeuvre. So I do support this, and thank you to the team for the excessive work that they've done on this.
Thank you, Councillor Gary.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. Most of the comments that I wanted to make have been made around the huge amount of work, but I wanted to specifically note my surprise at the number of style issues there were with the document, quite apart from the fact that we needed to comment on some content. I was genuinely surprised at how much of those style issues needed to be addressed, but clearly they did. And also wanted to register my level of frustration around, in some cases, the absence in the document, but addressed in our submission around climate change, the absence of some mention of it in the RPS, or poorly articulated, but that was addressed in our submission. So just drawing attention to that. Clearly staff have gone through this with a fine tooth comb, and it speaks to the technical expertise of our team. So thank you to them for the extraordinary work in putting together a particularly thorough and comprehensive submission.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to agree with most of the other councillors with what they're saying there, that it is an extensive document, and I think in these times it's really good that the staff have been able to get such a detailed document out. I also have quite a few concerns around the fact that ORC haven't given people a bit more time for this. Given we've got lockdown, you would think that maybe that would have been, you know, I suppose they've got deadlines, but it does seem a bit unfair, I must say. It also has highlighted the need for our councils, like Councillor O'Malley mentioned earlier, is for us to work together on a lot of these things, because there's a number of things in our submission that clearly show that actions that this document take will affect us directly, and particularly around the infrastructure. And it is, you know, we have issues with infrastructure in our city, just keeping up and making sure that we can have more development, particularly in housing. A lot of this is going to have a direct impact on that. So let's hope that some action is taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Further speakers? I just wanted to add to the chorus of thanks, really. The word gargantuan was used earlier, and it is appropriate in this circumstance. There is a huge call on our staff resource at the moment in the planning system, not just working through our own plans and appeals and variations, but also trying to shape and influence the higher order plans like this one to align with what we are trying to achieve, to say nothing of the ongoing effort required to participate in the legislative reform agenda, which is vast and moving on a very quick timeline. It's a huge body of work, and it's a credit to our staff that we are able to engage with all of those things with the degree of thoroughness that we have seen. So thank you to them. To the draft, to the RPS itself, it is encouraging to see in the document acknowledgement that it should be a function of the planning system to improve air quality outcomes in the region. It's a shame that we're going to have to wait some years before any tangible action is taken by the regional council to improve air quality outcomes. But it is a useful acknowledgement there. It is disappointing also that the opportunity has been taken here to relitigate matters that had been settled through the previous RPS process. You know, that there was a considerable amount of time and effort and money, both public and private money, that was spent going through that process, and to start again this way is somewhat disappointing. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of the comments that have made around what other districts do, and the suggestion has been made that they don't have the capacity in smaller TAs to resource the amount of work that is asked, and that is true. But it's equally true that different communities and different districts have different aspirations for managing natural resources and using the planning system to achieve those outcomes. And Councillor O'Malley mentioned that we will be asked to collaborate more with our neighbouring territorial authorities. It's a bit stronger than that. Under the proposed reform program, there will be regional scale planning committees that will set plan rules, and one of the great anxieties I have, and I think, and certainly Council did through its submission on the exposure draft of the Natural and Built Environments Act, is the ability that may be lost through a regional planning framework for us to be able to give effect to, through the planning system, the aspirations that our community have for managing growth and development within our environmental limits. And we presented yesterday to the select committee, Dr. Johnson and I, and made that point fairly firmly, and we're not alone in that. But certainly there are risks in this system, and not just the higher order planning documents, but the legislation itself, in terms of the ability that we will have to be able to influence those decisions in the future. Councillor Benson Pope, your right of reply.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just wanted to comment on Councillor O'Malley's comments and those that you have just made as well, because the situation in which we find ourselves in the hierarchy of importance of documents and their necessary alignment is a foretaste, if you like, I think, and the difficulties involved is a foretaste of what we are going to face with the very different expectations of some of our neighbours, which have been traversed, and the challenges that are coming down track to us with the development of the future development strategy for the region alongside RMA reform. So this is really a taste of what is to come, and I think the challenge for us as the largest and best resourced territorial authority in the region will be to make sure that the autonomy of each of those groups and their local decision-making capacity is at least protected, if not enhanced.
Thank you. I'll put the motion by a show of hands. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. Thank you. Item 6. A concession license for Waikawaiti Golf Club Incorporated. Mr. McLean is joining the call.
It's Mr. Graham, Your Worship.
And Mr. Graham. Opening comments from either or both of you.
Good morning, thank you. No, we'll take the paper as read, thanks.
Splendid. Questions, councillors? Councillor Barker and then Councillor Walker.
Just have a question. It mentions that there isn't a management plan around the golf course, the area of land, and I was wondering if there was going to be a management plan. I note that it's quite close to waterways and also to the ocean, and also it mentions about a pest management strategy, so I wonder if those things are part of the discussions that are being had.
Councillor Barker, I've got you playing over at the moment.
Are you there, Mr. Graham?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes. Okay, there's a bit of a lag between what I'm hearing and my reply. So there was a yeah. So I'll start now, Mr. Mayor. There is a Waikouaiti domain management plan. This land where the golf course is located is not part of that plan. So there is no management plan that directs our management of this part of the domain.
Councillor Walker.
Sorry, I also asked about whether there was a pest management strategy, because in the document it talks about pest management. So is there a pest management strategy? Is it their strategy, or do we have one for them?
Councillor Barker, I think you're talking about the clause that relates to their requirement to control rabbits and other vermin on the land, and that's just a standard clause typical for a rural location where we wouldn't undertake that work ourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker.
Yep, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, just my question is, the paper notes that the previous 14-year concession expired on the 28th of February. So just why are we waiting 6 months to get around to this? I'm just curious.
Councillor Walker, it's not an unusual situation for us to be in a lag. The process did actually commence a bit earlier than you're now seeing things. Obviously, with the requirement for public notification, that has taken an extra 4 to 6 weeks. However, we're catching up. There's no disadvantage to the clients or to council in us completing the process now.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's good to hear. And Your Worship, I'm happy to move the recommended option.
Thank you, Councillor Lord.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Yeah, no, my question was just in relation to the lease too, but I was asking, the concession. My question related to the length of time being 15 years. Is that just what they have asked for, or is that a standard length of a concession?
Yeah, Councillor Lord, the golf club would prefer to have a longer term. However, in this instance, 15 years is about as far out as council is generally comfortable to issue leases for. As you appreciate, not all sports clubs are strong. And so 15 years gives them a good amount of time. They do have some investments with their assets on the property. So those aren't put in jeopardy by a shorter term lease.
So, for example, your comment about not all sports clubs are strong, and I fully recognise that. If within, say, 10 years from now, the golf clubs gets down to just a handful of members and they can't continue, does their concession just expire once they've taken what they want from the place, or what happens? How would that phase out?
So, when I have my discussions with all sports clubs, I encourage an open dialogue. The club hopefully will be in contact to inform us of their position, and there is a termination clause which allows them to give notice of their intention not to continue with the lease. And should that be invoked, then we would work with them over how we would transition from golf club to reverting back to council management.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Just to the management plan in general. So this is coming under the reserves management plan. And I see that's dated 2005. When's that plan up for renewal? It's 15 years old.
So that is a master management plan, basically. There is work that commenced during the current year on reviewing that plan. However, there is staff changeover happening at the moment, and the planning and relationships manager would need to give you an update on that.
And I guess a follow-up question is the reason that this golf club sits under that plan is because it's a well-defined activity on the land. Is that why you're doing it rather than having its own reserve management plan?
Not all reserves have their own management plan. As I explained, the Waikaiti domain has an old management plan which doesn't cover this part of the domain area. We're using the Reserves General Policies Management Plan because its general policies apply to how we interpret this.
Okay, thanks. So I guess what I'm getting at maybe then is when does a reserve get a management plan and when does it not get a management plan? And given you've got the Waikaiti domain right next to this, is this potentially something in the forward works program we should be considering? Or do you believe that because it's a golf course and it's got a defined activity, it's fine under this existing plan?
Can I jump in here and ask a question of Mr. McLean, perhaps? I know that there is a schedule for reserve management plans to be reviewed. How frequently would that schedule be reviewed, which would be when you would anticipate reordering or adding or subtracting things from it?
Through the chair, so that's the Reserves General Management Plan is on that Council Forward Work Program. I don't have that in front of me, but I'm happy to update you as soon as I can lay my hands on that document. But we've got a pretty good schedule of reserve management plans that we have brought to Council, and the order and timing of those. So the Reserves Management General Policies, that work has commenced and is underway and is one of our higher priorities. Yeah. So we are, and to answer the previous question, we've tried to consolidate the number of management plans. So that was an old Waikaiti Domain Board plan, so well and truly out of date and no longer relevant. So where we landed was with reserves that have special and really unique characters. We will consider giving those their individual management plans, but where the management of the reserve is very general, and is the way we manage most of our reserves, we will bring them in under the reserves management general policies, just to keep things concise.
Thank you. That answers my question directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elder.
Just a question related to access, and just thinking ahead to Waikaiti Coastal Communities Group with regard to creating a off-road shared path. Say in the future, this is just I suppose a question that could happen is, could someone, if they wanted to put a shared path round the outside of that golf course, is there any room in that access part to enable anything like that to happen? Or what would be the process?
Through the chair, so this paper is relating directly to the granting of a concession, but we would consider any proposals, and we'd work with any of the stakeholders, including the golf course, to see if it was appropriate for the activities. Yeah, and we just assess that at the time.
Okay, it's just hypothetical really, because I don't know where that pathway would be, but I think it's good to be aware of that because the community wants to be able to.
Are there any further questions?
Okay, so thank you.
None. It's been moved by Councillor Walker, the recommendations. Is there a seconder? Seconded Councillor Barker. Thank you. Councillor Walker, would you like to speak to it?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, very briefly. Firstly, obviously, thanks to Mr. Graham and Mr. McLean. This one's fairly straightforward to me. The golf course obviously has been running successfully here since 1965. 3, so it's a long-established existing use with no identified issues during its time, which means by us renewing the concession, the likely adverse effects will be very, very minimal. And as the staff point out, it also means that the public can continue to enjoy the agony and the ecstasy that is golf at the Domain, and of course the club and its members will continue to manage and maintain the area in a tidy state. I will just slightly probably caution Councillor Elder and warn her that wayward golf balls and shared paths can be unfortunate bedfellows. Just be aware of that. And people who know the way I play golf can attest to that. So, yep, in closing, it seems absolutely, there seems absolutely no logical reason or advantage to us in not renewing the concession license. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wiley.
Yeah, I just also want to thank staff on how they've approached this. I think it's a very good outcome and a positive outcome for the community of Wakawaiti. The golf club have really developed and enhanced that golf course over the years and made it a great asset for the community. And for the many people that do travel there to go and use it and play there, because it is regarded, especially through winter, one of the better golf courses to play in that sense. But no, it's I think this is a good outcome and really positive to see the golf course having a great opportunity to thrive over the next 15 years.
Thank you. Further speakers? Councillor Walker, your right of reply. I'll take the motion, put the motion by show of hands. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. I did want to note we had received an apology late last evening from Councillor Lorfiso, which wasn't relayed at the start of the meeting, but I would like to, I'll have that reflected in the minutes for this meeting. Item 7, non-trading council controlled organisations application for exemption. Ms. Graham.
I'm happy to take it as read, Your Worship.
Thank you. Questions, councillors? Councillor Vandervis.
Happy to move, Your Worship.
Oh, very efficient. Are there questions, however? Councillor Raddick.
Just a small question. Items 4 and 5, Otago Power Limited and Lakes Contract Services Limited. What are they about? Why do we? What were they and why do we still have them?
But we were just keeping the name. I'm assuming that is related to us having a power company. So it just keeps the name for a very small cost.
Very good. Thank you.
Councillor Vandervis, would you like to speak to your motion?
Very briefly, none of these companies are being used for any trading. Sometimes it's handy to have a company with a different name in order to make some other transaction that you don't want to appear on a major company that is trading. So therefore, I think it's quite appropriate that we simply have these entities sitting there and that we don't go to the trouble of actually having to do company returns for them.
Thank you. Further speakers? Councillor Raddick has removed himself from the list. There are no further speakers. There is no right of reply required. I'll take the motion by show of hands. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. Item 8, representation review submission closing date extension. Ms. Sullivan.
Happy to take any questions, Your Worship.
Thank you. Questions, councillors? Councillor Vandervis. Thank you.
Happy to second.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No, it's been moved and seconded. Moved Councillor Vandervis, seconded Councillor Walker. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor? Are there any speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. That takes us to the end of the public part of the meeting. I hadn't anticipated going for more than 2 hours without taking a break. My assumption is that the first item on the non-public agenda will take us beyond 12 o'clock. So I'll move now that we adjourn the meeting for 15 minutes, seconded Councillor Walker, and return at 11:35. All those in favour? Those against? That's agreed. Thank you.